This is Sears Tower. It was the tallest building in the world. It's over 4.5 million square feet in size and was inspired by a pack of cigarettes. And for generations, it was the pride of Chicago. Yet, almost no one seems to know that before it was another Sears Tower from 1905, and it still stands in modern times. This 14-story neoclassical tower served as the centerpiece of the largest commerce complex on Earth, a place that Henry Ford visited to learn mass production. AM broadcasts were transmitted to set crop prices throughout the Midwest, and a place where over 22,000 Chicagoans came to work every single day. But here's the crazy part. Many historians argue that Chicago's first Sears Tower was far more important than the second one that would follow half a century later. So why does no one remember the original Sears Tower? What happened to its surrounding complex? And why did the corporation that built this all end in complete disaster? Stay tuned to find out as we explore the story of the first Sears Tower. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Let's go back to the middle of the 19th century, when two men changed, dare I say created, the American consumerism culture that you now enjoy today. First was Richard Warren Sears. Born the son of a blacksmith in Stewartsville, Minnesota on December the 7th, 1863, his parents were of English descent and ran a small wagon shop where young Richard would be given his first glimpse of local commerce. In early adulthood, he worked as a telegraph operator in the town of North Branch, Minnesota, for the local railway, and was later promoted as a station agent. And in all likelihood, Richard could have spent the rest of his life working the railroads. I mean, at not even 20 years old, he kind of already captured the American dream. But then, tragedy struck. Things began to go wrong when Richard's father, James Warren Sears, attempted to pivot his capital into large-scale livestock breeding around 1878 to 1879. Unfortunately, the speculation was a total bust, and the family lost everything. Shortly after, James suffered from severe physical and mental health issues, leading to his death some years later in 1894. In turn, young Richard became the sole financial provider for his widowed mother and sisters. And it's here that life's darkest moment shifted the young man's perspective to give him an idea that would come to change the world. You see, as Richard initially worked between those general offices and telegraph stations for the railroad, he soon realized three things that just about everyone else overlooked. First, city office salaries were capped by high living costs. Second, rural station agents operated with near total independence, low expense, and free access to rail and wires. And of course, there was the third thing. Early mail order catalog companies did not leverage points 1 and 2 against the market effectively. Let me be more direct. Richard had access to everything: the telegraph network, the loading docks, freight handling, and with little to no supervision, he realized that he was in a unique situation. Over time, he came to master the principles of sales and transportation logistics. Do you see where I'm going with this? So, in a seemingly bizarre move to everyone else, Richard requested a transfer out of the city and was assigned as a station agent in North Redwood, Minnesota. By the early 1880s, he lived out in the countryside as frugally as possible. Apparently, he was known to sleep inside of the train depot and trade minor chores around town for room and board elsewhere. Basically, he sacrificed comfort to remain focused on the bigger picture of running his side hustles right out of the train depot when no one was looking. For example, he'd buy coal and lumber in bulk to sell directly to local farmers, or he'd trade game from the local Native American hunters and ship it onward to big city markets. And then, when the timing was perfect, everything changed. You see, while Sears was mastering the art of small-town trade, a major shift occurred in American infrastructure. Basically, before November of 1883, the U.S. operated over 300 local solar time zones. And as you might imagine, that created endless complications for the railroads. So to standardize scheduling, the companies instituted 4 standardized time zones across the continent. With that, freight deadlines were nearly perfected, and Richard Sears compounded his business activities accordingly. All the while, as Sears was enjoying his unprecedented access and studying the merchandise trends of the rails, one trend began to really stand out: the return freight trap. For example, his station might receive a shipment of gold watches from a large manufacturer, only to have the local jeweler refuse the unsolicited shipment. Upon refusal, the wholesaler would then offer the already price-hiked items to the retailer at a lower consignment cost, with the explanation that the special offer was to help alleviate the cost for return shipment. At this point, in many cases, the unsuspecting retailer would then agree to take this newfound bargain off the wholesaler's hand, upmark the products, and sell them to the public at a small profit. And here's where Richard came in. With a bird's eye view of everything coming in and out of the region, he would take advantage of many instances where the local retailer actually refused the scam. In essence, Richard would scam the scammers. Sears would proactively contact the wholesaler, offer an even lower amount on the rejected shipment, and then mark up the price just high enough to make a profit, but more often than not, he'd also undercut local sellers in the process. And in that context, watches were his specialty. Within just a half a year, Sears had netted $5,000 and felt so confident in his new venture that he made a very bold decision. He went all in on the business, left his work as a station agent, and founded the R.W. Sears Watch Company, after which he relocated to Minneapolis, where he leased out space in the prestigious and since demolished Globe Building. The company enjoyed wild success. However, as Sears sold more watches, he ran into a few bottlenecks. Customers began sending in returns for things like repairs, adjustments, and warranty work. And although Sears was a brilliant promoter and salesman, he knew virtually nothing about fixing watches. So, to address these factors, he relocated once again to Chicago in 1887. The Windy City provided both better freight logistics and a larger labor pool to cover the more technical side of his business ambitions. And this next part is very important. After placing a classified ad in the Chicago Daily News for a watch repairman, an application from a man named Alvok C. Roebuck came in, a man that would come to be the co-founder of the Sears that we now know. Here's his story. Roebuck was born on January the 9th, 1864 in Lafayette, Indiana, also to parents of English descent. When Roebuck was just 3 years old, his family moved to a small town about 5 miles outside of the city. Like Richard Sears, Roebuck lost his father at a young age, leaving him to care for his mother and family farm. Even so, from an early age, Roebuck demonstrated an intense fascination with mechanical systems and fine craftsmanship, to the extent that without any formal training, he began tinkering in the art of clockworks. By the age of 16, he had mastered the complex mechanics of timepieces and was working as a self-taught watchmaker. From there, he spent his late teens and early 20s working on watch repairs and learning the practical nuances of micromechanics. By 1886, at the age of 23, Roebuck secured a position working at a small jewelry store in Hammond, Indiana. Through his steady hard work, he became a top repairman in the craft. Though, since Indiana was a limited market, he turned his gaze towards Chicago, regularly searching the help-wanted classifieds. And so it was. Sears replied just 2 days later, hiring Roebuck on the spot. Apparently, they hit it off to the point that in 1893, they incorporated an entirely new entity together as Sears, Roebuck and Company. In its initial Chicago years, the growing mail-order business operated out of various rented offices and warehouse spaces downtown, including locations like 55 North Dearborn, West Adams Street, and the Enterprise Building. Yet, times would become turbulent. While Roebuck's name became a part of one of the most famous retail brands in history, he would not enjoy the type of generational wealth that you'd expect from this opportunity. He just wasn't designed for it. Exhausted by the long hours, and terrified by the company's rising corporate debt, Roebuck asked Richard Sears to buy out his half-ownership stake. Because Sears didn't have enough cash on hand, he brokered a deal to sell Roebuck's 50% stake to Aaron Nussbaum and Julius Rosenwald for $75,000. These new stakeholders didn't just bring capital to the table, they brought an almost ravenous drive for success. As for the sellout, Roebuck, well, he didn't fare so well. He later invested heavily in Florida real estate during the land boom of the 1920s, and when the stock market crashed, followed by the Great Depression, he was left virtually bankrupt. Given the severity of those consequences, I also want to be fair to Roebuck's legacy here. he had a real hand in categorically changing the world of commerce in a way that only people like the founder of Amazon has in modern day. And it could also be argued that companies like Amazon built their businesses on philosophies propagated by the Sears and Roebuck Corporation. At the same time, Roebuck would not be the first man in history to have his name attached to a major brand, despite the fact that he lost practically everything. In fact, this phenomenon is surprisingly common for the era. Let me provide you with a few other examples, because I really want you to understand this reality for later on in the video. James Watt was a pioneer of the Industrial Revolution. His name became a standard power unit, and he died with his fortune largely depleted by the cost of his legal battles. Charles Goodyear of Goodyear Tire spent his life dodging debt collectors and fighting copycat patents. He also died broke in 1860, owing over $200,000 or $7 million in today's money. Whereas Rudolf Diesel, the inventor of the diesel engine, blew his entire fortune on speculation. Facing total bankruptcy in 1913, he mysteriously vanished off an ocean liner, never to be seen again. And if we look over to the European noble class, the people who Americans of the 19th century were basically trying to emulate, the reality was really no better. Perhaps some of you remember our recent video about that horrific-looking abandoned palace. Well, despite operating on different sides of the Atlantic, Roebuck and the noblewoman who built this palace share a strikingly similar narrative arc. Both rose from modest working-class origins to anchor iconic 19th century industrial brands. Both had massive commercial empires bearing their names. Yet Roebuck was left with near nothing at the end of his life, as the noblewoman made all the right decisions, did enjoy the fruits of her fortune, but still, it ended in ruin all the same. The wall murals of her grand ballroom are now a pile of rubble. The cathedral looks like the set of a horror film. And the palace's grand tower, similar to the size of Chicago's first Sears Tower, appears to be slowly falling apart. I know this seems abstract, but trust me, you're going to appreciate this later on in the episode as it applies to corporate wealth as well. Here's my point. Roebuck's fortune probably wouldn't have meant much in the grand scheme of things regardless. As it turns out, generational wealth is widely a myth. In wealth management and economic literature, there is a famous saying that captures the life cycle of family fortunes. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. Generation 1 starts with nothing, works hard in their shirt sleeves, and generates a fortune. Generation 2 grows up watching the struggle, maintains or slightly expands the wealth, but lives in comfort. Then there's Generation 3, born into extreme ease, lacking any connection to the original work ethic that brought the fortune, and so they spend or mismanage all the assets, ending up with things like this abandoned palace, or as you'll see later in the video, a situation far more devastating. You guys probably noticed that I have this hard hat on. It's actually become obligatory for these adventures, but it's not the only thing that I need when I'm out filming. In fact, recently I've been using a new eSIM service called Sally, and it is fantastic. Not only is it affordable, but it's simple to use. All I do is I open my phone, switch on the app, connect the line, and I am connected to the rest of the world with data. But it's not only a data connection plan, you can also get eSIM phone numbers and use it for things like 2-step verification when you're traveling. There's also a built-in ad blocker which can save you up to 28% of your data usage when you're abroad. So if you're headed abroad, make sure that you download the Sally app by clicking on this QR code so that you can stay connected. Thank you so much, Sally, for sponsoring the episode. But now, back to our adventure. By the early 1900s, Sears, Roebuck & Company had perfected the art of catalog sales, to the point that they were basically collapsing under the weight of their own success. A few things helped make this possible. The expansion of rural free delivery by the US Postal Service suddenly connected tens of millions of farm families to the catalog. At the same time, the product line exploded to include everything from cast iron stoves to buggies and entire build-it-yourself houses. In the first half of that decade alone, the company's annual sales skyrocketed from $750,000 to $50 million, while its workforce transitioned from under 200 employees to over 9,000 across the nation. This rapid growth created a logistical nightmare in downtown Chicago. At the time, Sears was still renting out office spaces across dozens of cramped, scattered buildings, forcing workers to haul the goods through congested streets on horse-drawn wagons just to reach the train station. And as bad as that was, by the time that daily order volumes hit 100,000, issues like lost packages and shipping delays became commonplace. And this is where the new co-owner, Julius Rosenwald, realized that the company could no longer survive as a collection of downtown offices. It required a purpose-built, highly efficient central hub. The solution he proposed was the construction of the Homan Square mega complex. Acting almost desperately fast, the corporation commissioned principal architects George C. Niemans and William K. Fellows. These were reputable professionals who had spent the prior decade as draftsmen for the legendary architectural firm led by Daniel Burnham, author of the Plan of Chicago and pioneer of the Chicago skyscraper. Niemans and Fellows envisioned the Homan Square mega complex as a world's first, a mix of hyper-efficient logistical engineering, grand civic beauty, and employee well-being. Indeed, they engineered a 3.3 million square foot campus as a mechanical design basically around the continuous flow of goods. With blueprint in hand, the company purchased 40 acres in Chicago's North Lawndale neighborhood, an area that at the time was still a largely open rural prairie. And I need to point out that the site was chosen because it sat directly along the Chicago Terminal Transfer Railroad line. Formed in 1897 through the consolidation of several smaller Chicago area lines, the CTT operated an L-shaped loop extending from the northwest side of the city down through the west side around to Indiana. This network connected scattered industrial factories on Chicago's outskirts to all of the 20-plus major intercontinental trunk lines that converged on the city. So when Sears purchased the nearby property, the CTT tracks offered something that downtown never could: direct, high-capacity, off-street freight access. Though to make this all possible and enjoy the amazing tax revenues that definitely followed, Chicago's City Council granted Sears unprecedented permission to close and build over existing public street right-of-ways. And with that, ground broke on January the 24th, 1905. Over the course of the build, 7,000 workers utilized 60 freight car loads of building supplies daily, ultimately consuming 23 million dark red bricks and nearly 15 million board feet of yellow pine lumber. Crews also drilled 1,563 foundation caissons, ranging from 50 to 90 feet in depth. They also excavated over 4,000 feet of subterranean utility tunnels to link the buildings together. But it doesn't end there. Here's the best part. The massive merchandise building was completed in under 8 months by September of 1905 and handed over to the company on January the 15th, 1906. When the complex opened for operations, it was the largest private construction project finished in under a year in American history. And let me show you what was inside. First, dedicated spur lines ran directly into the building. This was a game changer for loading in the harsh Chicago winters. Because the tracks were completely inside of the ground floor of the 3.3 million square foot merchandise building, workers could now load and unload freight boxcars in a climate-controlled environment. That's right, no more freezing cold Chicago wind. The indoor train shed was long enough to hold dozens of cars simultaneously across parallel tracks, all inside the building. There were also gravity chutes and conveyor belts snaking down the upper floors of the warehouse directly onto the indoor train platform. This way, workers could pull pre-packaged custom orders off of the belts and load them straight into the waiting train cars. Think about that. This system allowed Sears to ship thousands of tons of merchandise out of one building to the entirety of America beyond its walls. For communication, an intricate internal network comprising over 15 miles of pneumatic tubes linked departments across the campus. Designed to replace thousands of manual messenger trips, this system relied on compressed air to shoot metal cartridges through overhead pipes at speeds of up to 30 miles per hour. As I understand it, incoming orders were opened in the administration building, logged, placed into cartridges, and routed through the central tube dispatch system in a network that was the largest of its kind in the world back then. These order tickets were delivered almost instantaneously to upper floor merchandise stockrooms, enabling workers to pick up the packed items in exact alignment with the company's strict synchronized shipping schedule. As I see it, this system was about as close as you could get back then to same-day shipping. With that in mind, to coordinate their thousands of employees and process over 100,000 daily orders, the Homan Square campus operated one of the largest private telecommunications and timing infrastructures of the early 20th century. Sears installed a private internal branch exchange telephone switchboard connecting hundreds of campus extensions, alongside direct Western Union telegraph lines for rapid nationwide supplier communications. Furthermore, to enforce the company's strictly timed shipping schedules, the entire campus was wired to an electric master clock system that synchronized wall clocks across every room to the exact second. However, they also set boundaries. Sears intentionally banned customers from placing retail orders over the phone lines. Indeed, they chose to preserve the mail order paper trail to maximize low-cost operational efficiency. Beyond that, in terms of electricity, there was an independent powerhouse right on location. Just west of the main building, the coal-fired power plant housed 4 water tube boilers and steam-driven electric generators capable of producing over 3,000 horsepower. Coal was delivered directly to the plant via a dedicated train trestle, where it was automatically dumped into overhead storage hoppers and then fed into furnaces by mechanical stokers. This powerhouse operated 24/7, making Sears entirely self-sufficient from Chicago's municipal grid. Progressively for the time, Homan Square also offered an array of worker welfare amenities. There were heavily subsidized subterranean cafeterias, dining rooms, and cafes capable of serving thousands of warm meals daily to employees during their strictly timed lunch breaks. For health and medical care, Sears also operated a fully staffed on-site clinic to handle injuries and routine care right on the spot. To encourage recreation and physical well-being, the grounds also featured an elaborate sunken garden park, outdoor walking plazas, tennis courts, and athletic field for company baseball leagues. Some sources also suggest that at one point there was a dedicated branch of the YMCA, the Sears Department YMCA, with indoor gymnasiums, locker rooms, and hot showers, which is really remarkable for the time. Blue-collar workers could enjoy a sanitary, high-end recreational space that was really unheard of for the time. Actually, it kind of sounds like something that Google or Apple would provide for their workers in the modern day. For the most part, the entire facility was closed to the public. However, guests were able to access the campus's most astonishing feature, the Sears Tower observation deck. The original Sears Tower served as the architectural anchor of the powerful catalog's public image. The tower was engineered in a blend of classical Renaissance revival styles. It was constructed around a heavy steel skeleton, clad in dark red pressed brick with white limestone belt courses and intricate terracotta trim. The 14-story structure stands at 250 feet tall on a compact square footprint measuring approximately 50 by 50 feet. And I want to be clear, the original Sears Tower did not set world records for being the highest building on Earth. Rather, this one held the record of being a part of the world's largest building. The tower was engineered to house the utilities required to maintain the 3.3 million square foot campus below it. Its most critical operational feature was in its upper tiers, a massive 100,000 gallon steel water tank. This elevated water reservoir provided the gravity-fed water pressure necessary to supply the complex's state-of-the-art automatic fire sprinkler network. Furthermore, the tower housed the central routing nodes for the 15-mile pneumatic tube network, its master telephone switchboard, and the electric master clock system we discussed earlier. Additionally, the lower floors of the tower housed formal reception suites and executive offices where visiting dignitaries were received in an environment of civic elegance. In contrast, the 14th floor housed an observation deck where visitors enjoyed views of the skyline, Lake Michigan, and the surrounding countryside. This area was reached via high-speed electric elevators and became a very popular destination, drawing up to 1,000 tourists per day as a part of the educational tours through the campus. This tower also achieved several other historical firsts throughout its operational life. In April of 1924, Sears launched its influential commercial radio station, WLS, standing for World's Largest Store, broadcasting farm reports, weather, and live musical programming from a dedicated studio inside the building. Considering all the above, it's no wonder that Henry Ford traveled to Chicago to study what was then the absolute pinnacle of industrial efficiency. What Ford witnessed was unlike anything else on Earth. Apparently, Ford internalized Sears's core operational principle, bringing the work to stationary labor. And 7 years later, in 1913, adopted those exact principles to build the world's first moving automobile assembly line at his Highland Park plant in Michigan. Throughout its history, Chicago's first Sears Tower became a pillar of American commerce. Everyone knew it, the same way that you or I would know about the second Sears Tower. The building's iconic silhouette was routinely depicted on covers of millions of Sears catalogs, solidifying its place in American pop culture. However, as time passed, the world began to change. By the late 1960s, with the company's endless expansion from catalogs to physical stores, Sears had grown into the world's largest retailer, employing nearly 350,000 people globally. By this time, its founders had long since passed. Richard Warren Sears had passed away on September the 28th, 1914, at the age of 51 in Waukesha, Wisconsin, due to kidney failure aggravated by decades of relentless overwork. Julius Rosenwald passed away decades later on January the 6th, 1932, at the age of 69 at his home in Highland Park. And like Richard Sears, he was entombed in a private family room inside Rose Hill Mausoleum in Chicago. After his death, Rosenwald left an estate valued at roughly $80 million, over $1.4 billion in today's money, but he intentionally avoided leaving behind a permanent, multi-generational billion-dollar dynasty, opting to give his money away to charity instead. As for Roebuck, he died on June the 18th, 1948, at the age of 84 in Evanston while visiting his daughter. And so not only were the founders out of the picture, but logistics had shifted from trains to trucks. At the same time, when many customers were failing to order anything via catalog, since they now had car keys. But don't get me wrong, the company was still moving forward, to the point that by 1968, Sears Roebuck & Company seemed unstoppable. They generated nearly 1% of the entire United States gross national product. And in that context, while the Homan Square campus remained the operational heart of the business, the executive and administrative workforce had completely outgrown it. This is where history repeated itself, as Sears employees were now scattered across dozens of separate rented office spaces throughout Chicago. So to once again solve that logistical nightmare, executives determined that they needed a single, massive central headquarters to consolidate their sprawling team under one roof. And so it was. CEO Gordon Metcalf famously declared that as the largest retailer on Earth, Sears would need to build the tallest building in the world. To do so, they hired the legendary architectural firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, led by Chief Architect Bruce Graham, to design the second Sears Tower. And to reach heights never previously imagined, they found inspiration in a strange place, a pack of cigarettes, as the individual smokes resembled the groundbreaking bundle tube structural design. Instead of a single giant box, the skyscraper was built around a grid of 9 individual steel tubes, all tied together. As the building rose, individual tubes dropped off at different heights, at floors 50, 66, and 90, giving the building its iconic, stepped profile while effortlessly cutting through Chicago's fierce winds. Groundbreaking took place in April of 1970. For the next 3 years, Chicagoans watched their icon rise into the sky. As that final beam was hoisted to the top of the 110th floor, the Sears Tower officially reached 1,450 feet, surpassing New York's World Trade Center to become the tallest building on Earth. I'm not sure if people from outside Chicago can fully appreciate what a proud moment this was for the city. And not to make this personal, but my own grandfather worked as a laborer on that construction project. It was such a point of pride in our family that we would actually brag about it decades later. Hell, I'm bragging about it to you now, yet I haven't even lived in Chicago for years. Anyhow, when Sears employees moved in between 1973 and 74, the tower operated as a vertical city. Over 13,000 employees occupied the lower half of the building, floors 1 through 50, where the giant sprawling floors accommodated huge department teams. As for those upper floors, with the best views, they were leased to banks, corporate law firms, and executives. And as great as this all was, the building had one flaw that was not really previously considered. The lower floors were so sprawling that non-Sears corporate tenants hated them. They were too dark and deep for standard desk layouts. Additionally, the tower had been built at the western edge of the loop, away from the main financial core, meaning after 5 p.m., the plaza around the tower became devoid of street life. And by the late 1980s, things got much worse, as Sears, as a company, was in deep trouble. Around that time, flexible competitors like Walmart and Target were tearing away at Sears' market share in retail, while specialized stores like Home Depot destroyed its hardware dominance. At this point, the world's tallest tower became the company's worst burden, not to mention the frequent layoffs equated to vacant floors. Between the maintenance expenses and tax payments, the reality began to look daunting. In the meantime, their aging, partly abandoned mega complex from almost a century prior was also beginning to cause financial headaches in its own right. Hence, in 1989, management decided that it was time to clean up the mess. They'd moved their dwindling workforce, yet again, to a much cheaper campus in Hoffman Estates. A move that, in the end, would set one final world record for the world's largest, but this time, it wouldn't be the type of record you'd like to be remembered for. In 1990, Sears sold the second Sears Tower to an investment trust fund for $850 million, though it agreed to lease back space temporarily while its suburban campus was being built. By 95, the transition to Hoffman Estates was complete. Some years later, the new owners would rename the building Willis Tower, and I'm not sure if it's just me here, but I feel like that name never really stuck. As for the old mega complex, it was too antiquated to be saved. At this point, it was far too costly to heat, secure, or redevelop in its existing form. Hence, Sears financed the demolition of almost the entire 40-acre site. Fortunately, at this point, preservationists fought to save the most iconic architectural treasure from the wrecking ball. The original 14-story Sears Tower from 1906, now called Sears Nichols Tower. Additionally, parts of the old power plant and administrative buildings were spared, as they were awarded Chicago landmark status. This strategic preservation allowed the vacant footprint to eventually be redeveloped into modern residential housing and community facilities, while ensuring that things like the historic clock tower survived to tell the story of a bygone time. And this has been a fascinating evolution, especially when you examine satellite imagery over time. You can see how the rail link and artery that once made rapid purchase available to American farmers has slowly faded away. As for the campus's tunnel system, well, it has mostly been filled in. However, a portion of the deeper utility tunnel infrastructure is thought to remain buried beneath the site today. That being said, when it comes to underground infrastructure, the most significant surviving segment is the reinforced concrete utility trench running between the historic powerhouse and the original Sears Tower. With that in mind, it's time to discuss the company's final chapter. Built at a cost of $300 million, the new, ultra-modern complex had some surprising similarities to its predecessor from a century prior, to the degree that it was presented in the press as a suburban workplace paradise. 5 interconnected 5-story buildings were linked by glass pedestrian sky bridges and nestled among manicured ponds and walking trails. The campus catered to more than 5,000 corporate employees, featuring its own bank, dental clinic, and full-service food court. Plus, it had the convenience of sprawling parking structures. However, it was all in vain. This new headquarters could not halt Sears' rapid economic decline. By this time, the ship was sinking fast. As a last-ditch effort to recover the business, Sears merged with Kmart in 2005. The company aggressively slashed costs, sold off most of its iconic brands, and laid off workers. As those layoffs mounted throughout the 2010s, the vast Hoffman Estates complex turned into an eerie ghost town. At this point, entire multi-story wings were sealed off, and empty. When Sears Holdings finally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2018, only a small fraction of the 2.4 million square foot campus remained occupied. By September of 2022, the remaining corporate staff evacuated the campus for good. As they did, they left behind an intact 1990s time capsule. And it's here that Sears came to its final architectural world record. Sitting entirely vacant in the post-pandemic era, the massive single-tenant complex was virtually unmarketable to standard corporate buyers, earning it the title of North America's largest abandoned building. Realizing that converting the specialized campus into something like residential housing was financially unviable, the site was sold in 2023 to a Dallas-based developer for $194 million. And in a final, somewhat symbolic turn, plans were set in motion to completely demolish all 2.4 million square feet of Sears's final headquarters, clearing the way to make land for a multi-billion-dollar data hub designed to power modern cloud computing and artificial intelligence. Though some marks of Sears have been left, the artificial retention ponds, water feature, and basic grading established back in the 1990s were largely integrated into the new site's plan for stormwater management. As for the majority of the remaining buildings, they've been crushed into rubble. And as I understand it, the plan is for that rubble to be used in the foundation of the new data centers. So that's what happened to Chicago's first Sears Tower. I'm not sure about you, but I really didn't expect that twist at the end. And I kind of feel that it's too bad we can't trade back and have Sears instead of AI slop. But like I said earlier, and we discussed many examples of this, you should rest assured that no empire lasts forever. Until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.